Joining me now is California Democratic Congressman Khanna. He represents parts of Silicon Valley. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. I want to talk a little bit about tech and Silicon Valley and the changing way that Americans and lawmakers are perceiving tech. There seems to be bipartisan frustration with tech. You have Democrats who are not trusting it now because of their involvement with the 2016 election or their infiltration during the 2016 election. Then other Republicans see it as just out of touch with America, this liberal part of the country. And then liberal op-ed pages, interestingly, are using words like evil and not your friend when it comes to big tech. So as the person who represents a good portion of Silicon Valley, what is your response to those sorts of criticisms?
Well, I think we have to have some nuance. First, these companies are still widely admired. I think Apple and Google have over 80% approval ratings, and I'm reminded that in Congress we've got an 11% approval rating. That said, look, they have to do better. There were mistakes that were made. They didn't do enough to have third-party verification. If someone goes onto your show and if I make a claim, it will be verified. On social media, there were no mechanisms to verify it. And they didn't do enough in disclosing where some of these ads were coming from. So I do think the social media companies, tech companies, need to be more transparent, need to acknowledge that mistakes were made. But overall, I remain a technology optimist, and I think most Americans remain optimistic about technology. Are
you confident that tech companies are taking the steps they need to in order to secure their databases, secure their platforms in time for 2018?
I think they have started. I think it would be wrong to say that they have solved the problem. These are very difficult problems. Even if they hire thousands of more people to do reviews, there's going to be a need for better machine learning, better artificial intelligence to be able to review the millions of possible people who use social media, and that's a conversation we need to have. I also think, and I've suggested this before, they need to hire a lot of journalists and people from journalism schools to say, what are the social media standards? How can we make sure something doesn't happen like what happened in the Roy Moore case, where a woman went on Twitter or a person and said that the Washington Post paid her? Turned out to be wrong, but that story was tweeted and retweeted and could have influenced people's voting decision. They need to find a way to make sure that that is removed from those platforms.
Tech companies and the leaders of tech companies, Mark Zuckerberg in particular, have changed their stories a number of times since the election. Initially, Zuckerberg was laughing it off, saying in no way could it have interfered in the election or had any sort of influence. That story obviously changed quite a bit. And given that we're running up to 2018, 2020 is on the horizon as well, and there still should be a lot more done by tech companies. Do you think it's time for more scrutiny, potentially oversight or regulation on the part of Congress on to tech?
I do, but I don't think it is one of grandstanding, of just asking a question to make it onto the evening news. I think it has to be collaboration. And these tech companies have to realize, I mean, they claim that they helped bring on the Arab Spring, and they claim that people like Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders benefited from social media. And there's no question that they did, but they can't say that they're changing the world with social media and then not acknowledge the negative impacts, the fact that they amplify those platforms' hate speech, the fact that they have led to false propaganda on those platforms. And I think what would be great is if we tone down the rhetoric, if tech leaders on their part were more transparent, to come to the media, answer the tough questions, be open and honest that it's a new technology that has mistakes. And politicians should really learn the technology and try to be collaborative in how to solve the problems. That may involve more regulation, but it also just involves a conversation about what type of technology is needed to solve some of these problems.
Isn't it going to be difficult, though, for Congress to figure out a way to regulate or even to work with companies on this? Do many folks in Congress understand how these platforms work? Do many members of Congress know how to code?
Well, I think that the Congress could learn a little bit more. They should come out to the Valley and learn what is possible. I mean, for example, some people have called for net neutrality for tech companies, not just for internet service providers. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that Amazon should be required to sell every product in the world, or that every website should have an alternative perspective? So I do think there has to be more knowledge about the conversation. And there has to be one other central point, which is when I go to places like Ohio, Youngstown, which Tim Ryan represents, or Paintsville, Kentucky, which Hal Rogers, a Republican, represents, he calls Paintsville Silicon Holler. And people there, they are hungry for technology to come to their communities, to have new tech jobs. I think Silicon Valley has a responsibility to make sure that some of these jobs are placed in other parts of the country. And I think Congress has a responsibility to understand the benefits of technology as well and how to take advantage of that.
A number of Democratic voters are for the beginning of impeachment proceedings against President Trump. 2018 is a big election, and there's a lot of talk about whether or not Democrats should run on impeachment. What do you think?
I think that would be a mistake. And here's what I say to my colleagues on the Democrats who want to push for impeachment. I'd say, imagine if there was a Republican who said, I don't care what Bob Mueller finds. I don't care if the president was bribed. I'm never going to vote for impeachment. We'd find that totally unreasonable. We'd say, well, what about the evidence? Well, how can we say we're for impeachment before we even know the Mueller investigation or the outcome? We should wait to see what the evidence is, or we're being equally biased. And I also think that the Democrats, we've got to learn the lesson, one of the lessons of this last election. People were upset at all of us in positions of responsibility. They felt their lives weren't being taken into consideration, that a lot of the job creation, the wealth creation was on the coast. And we've got to figure out, how do we connect? How do we assure people who are left behind that we have a vision for them? Everyone is capable of having an opinion about Donald Trump. There's nothing I can say today that's probably going to change someone's mind about Donald Trump. But I do think what I can say and what Democrats can say may give them more confidence that we actually have a plan to solve their problems. And my belief is that should be the focus.
Congressman Khanna, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, Katie, for having me on.
Happy New Year.